This is Harley Hartwell, and you're listening to the Case Closed Podcast.
You are listening to the Case Closed Podcast, and as usual, we have a lot to talk about. Lately, I haven't recorded a whole lot of episodes recently because there hasn't been as much for me not as much for me to talk about that I would want to put into a full episode. So I am so glad, though, today to be bringing you a podcast. And joining me is Kevin Rodriguez. He's been a guy that's really been a part of what we've been doing for a long time. Several articles with Examiner back in the day for Case Closed, and really has done a great job of documenting with what's happening with the series here in the States and in general with the English dub. So, Kevin, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. And what's really interesting is that you and I have been communicating throughout these many years on Case Closed, but this is the first time we're actually talking.
Yes. Through several interactions and news and big things happening, and then sometimes in the not so big things happening, we have managed to keep in touch. And obviously, your articles, especially early on and throughout, have just been really, I think, impactful to the series, and I think a huge part of it eventually, coming back. So just want to say I really appreciate those and appreciate, everything that you've done for the community and the community.
Oh, thanks. However I could help, I suppose.
This series, and we've talked about it briefly before, it has such a rich history, but also a complicated history. I think when it comes to the English dubs, I don't know. I may have briefly talked to you about this last year, but having a chance to work on the Singapore English dub with Joe Murray and that restoration project, where we were able to kind of restore and remaster 22 of the 52 episodes they worked on. Learning a lot as far as the Funimation dub was not the first English dub. And that it had its start, all the way out in Singapore, and then Funimation acquired the license, really the same year that the Singapore dub was airing in Singapore, and then about a year later, it appears on Adult Swim, and then on DVD and in stores. I really would like to, get your take on that time period back then, and kind of how'd you get into it? What was so fascinating about it?
Well, the funny thing, I'll touch on the Singapore dub real quick, which I haven't seen, but it should be noted, Funimation is usually not the first one to dub anything. It's a little known fact, Harmony Gold was the first people to actually dub Dragon Ball, and there was a Philippines dub of Dragon Ball Z either at the same time or a little before Funimation took a crack at it. So, Funimation tends to be a little late to the game, although I'm going to express bias that even with some name changes, I do think the Funimation dub is still the best dub we've got. But my experience with the Case Closed, I actually was aware that it was a show called Detective Conan before it aired, but I never watched it because, Detective Conan started in 1996. Now, that was the first year of Pokemon, I believe, and it was 1 year after Sailor Moon ended. So this was a little while ago. This show's pretty old. And fan subs were not always easy to get back then, and that was how you saw it. But I actually grew up really liking mystery stories. I read Hardy Boy books. I loved Murder, She Wrote with my mom, which people might laugh, but the thing that I liked most about Murder, She Wrote is that was one of the few fictional shows that made the viewer a participant in the action, where basically if you were observant enough and if you paid enough attention and you could pick up on the clues, you might be able to figure out who the murderer was before Jessica Fleischer did. And when you did, it was a great feeling. It was kind of like getting the correct answer on Jeopardy or something. It was just like an exhilarating thing. So I had for years been told by friends, well, if you really liked Murder, She Wrote, you should check out Detective Conan. That's basically the anime version of Murder, She Wrote. And now when I recommend people what Case Closed is, because some people say it's a very hard show to describe, I tell them, well, Case Closed is basically Murder, She Wrote crossed with the Hardy Boys. Kids solve mysteries, and like Murder, She Wrote, you are a participant. You can actually figure out who the murderer is before the main characters do. And in fact, they encourage you to try to do that. And so when I heard that it had been licensed for America and it was going to premiere on Cartoon Network, I was ecstatic. Like, I couldn't wait to actually see it. And then I was almost crushed when I found out the starting time, 1:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
So we'll probably talk about the biggest mistakes or biggest blunders or mishandlings of Case Closed in America a little later, but spoiler alert, that was definitely probably one of the bigger ones. I did stay up late, though, and I did watch it, but here's the thing that's so bad about things like that is like at 1:30 in the morning, if you don't absolutely love that show, you're not going to tune in the next night. It's way too much of a hassle to even do. Thankfully, I did love it. It was pretty much everything my friend had described. This was the very first episode, and it's like I actually kind of liked the. In fact, I recorded it at the time, and I had to rewatch it again because, like a lot of people, I was probably like, "Well, one of the Men in Black obviously killed this person. I mean, that seems pretty obvious." And then it was the woman, and so I actually even rewatched it, and it was like, "Oh shoot, there are the clues." That's right. You can play along with it, and I was basically hooked ever since. So that was. But the staying up late was a problem, so I had to at some point DVR the thing, which means that despite watching the entire first run on Cartoon Network, I don't think I actually contributed to the ratings. So anyway, that was my introduction to Case Closed in America.
Well, those ratings are a little false anyway, when you kind of look at them and how they pull ratings and all that. But that's that's another one for another day, I suppose, huh?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, for me it was a little different. I mean, I came in I think pretty late. The first episode I ever saw was Jack Attacks with the dog and jumping on the guy and him falling down the stairs. So that was my first introduction to it. So I mean, on Adult Swim. But I do recall, that time, still seeing the single DVDs, in stores and stuff like that, and not really knowing a whole lot of what it was. But I did notice, like at local Best Buy or at the time Suncoast, it did take up quite a bit of space on those shelves at the time. But I think it was also a weird transitional period for the series to come out, in the time where it was, we're doing single DVDs with 3 and 4 episodes, and then we're, putting full season box sets of some other series out there, or just starting to transition into that, and then the episodes they were putting out weren't even on Adult Swim at one time, so it was a little confusing.
Yeah, well, that would be another mistake I would consider in the long run. But I don't know. Tell me, did you watch the whole thing live on Adult Swim, or did you start on DVD really, or?
I started some episodes on Adult Swim. I mean, like I said, I saw Jack Attacks, and I started watching. I started, I would say, in the 30s and 40s, and then I picked up the DVDs and mostly did that. And then over time, I went back and watched the first 30 episodes that I never really got to see a whole lot of. I mean, I saw episode 1 at some point in there to kind of get an understanding of what was going on, but I watched everything so out of order, and that's kind of how the series was presented to the audience, and in so many ways was kind of that out of order. But I think a lot of anime at the time on Adult Swim was kind of on probation in a lot of ways, because the higher ups at Adult Swim didn't necessarily care for anime.
Well, here's how it was explained to me, because I was able to. I actually had a communication with someone from Anime News Network, and then I kind of confirmed with people who worked at Cartoon Network at the time that the issue with the anime wasn't the numbers. The numbers were very good, and apparently they were better for Case Closed than we had realized because it followed Inuyasha or something, and Inuyasha did very well for the network. The issue with the ratings appeared to be the people who were watching it. Because you hear in TV networks all the time, like the key 18 to 35 demo or the key 6 to 12-year-old demo for kids shows. And some people wonder, well, what's that mean? And well, that means that this is the age group that they want, because these are the age groups that tend to buy more stuff when they see advertisements. And a lot of the anime fell between a 13 to 18 demo. And from what I've explained, that's the toxic demographics. Like, those are the people that don't buy anything, nevertheless a DVD. Like, and it makes sense because, I mean, granted, I was unusual. I was buying Case Closed DVDs. In fact, I probably bought all the different Funimation releases way too many times for what I ultimately got from Funimation at the end of the day. But I did buy DVDs, but I mean, all my friends, because we were 14, 15 at the time, my friends did not buy Dragon Ball on DVD. They would just watch it on TV. They didn't buy Dragon Ball action figures. They might buy them if it's at a yard sale for 50 cents, but they just didn't buy anything for their hobbies for the most part. And that would make sense that would be an awkward audience to have, because it's I don't know, from my perspective, it's kind of like having a Disney fan who subscribes to Disney Plus, but they don't buy the merchandise, they don't buy the DVDs, and they don't go to the theme parks. Like, I mean, what good is that customer really at the end of the day?
Yeah, I mean, you pose a interesting point with that. I wasn't aware of the demo in regards to that at all. But, I just, or really any details about the ratings other than, hearing over the years it had poor ratings. Um, and
Yeah.
so, I mean, it's, I know Inuyasha was such a strong property, and, shows like Cowboy Bebop that aired on there too. So, and I mean,
Yeah.
Cowboy Bebop still seems to end up on Toonami every now and again.
Yeah, and people definitely watch it, but like when you really stop and think about, like, how much merchandise have you seen people buy of Inuyasha or Cowboy Bebop over the years, and
Right.
that's where the problem was. Like, Funimation did not buy Case Closed to basically be a hit show. They bought it to be a Dragon Ball or Naruto or Inuyasha. They saw merchandising potential. In fact, little known fact, years in 1997 or maybe it was 99, when Pokemon and Digimon were at the height of their career, Fox Kids considered bringing Detective Conan over because they saw, oh, cute kids solving mysteries, that might work, and then they basically watched a dozen episodes and threw in the towel. They figured
Yeah.
they said there was no way they could really do this as a kids show.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, had they approached that idea now, maybe they could have, because there's enough Detective Kids only episodes that are much tamer on the violence scale that if you just focus on those, maybe you could get an Americanized Detective Kids show out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think ultimately I would love that. By the way, I mean, you could always do, like an idea of putting like an essential like Detective Boys collection and putting it out, or the Junior Detective League out, I guess, on one of those networks. But I know that, hindsight looking back, I know it fell into an odd place, and I also know, that late time slot really um, it plays a huge impact. And
Yeah. Well, are
you
we
know,
talking about the mistakes of the show in America now? Because I think the time slot was really not the biggest thing when you get down to it.
we can for sure. I mean, I just would have loved to have seen it, have a little bit better shake in that regard.
Yeah.
But we most certainly can for
Yeah.
sure.
Well, the time slot was a big issue. I mean, 1:30 a.m. was just not a good time. In fact, I kind of think back, and when I think about what Adult Swim is now, it's like, man, what if it had started at 9 p.m.? Like, it's late enough so that it's like most people are still awake and they can watch it, but it's late enough that you can kind of signal like this isn't a kids show per se. I think 9 o'clock would have been a lot better for that show. So 1:30, I mean, you're competing with, uh, I think at the time you were competing with Conan O'Brien, um, if I recall correctly. James Corden was around back. See, that's the thing. This was 2004, and it's like, what was on in 2004? So the time slot was definitely a big problem. I think the DVDs were a mistake on a couple levels. First of all, I do think it was a mistake that they did jump ahead of the episodes. Now, I'm kind of trying to look at Funimation's thought process here, and it's like, well, look, we can get people hooked on the show on TV, but they might not want to buy episodes that they already watched, so let's put them on DVD. I mean, that's probably their thinking, and they did it with Dragon Ball Z, I should say, to great success. People forget that episodes of Trunks and Cell went on sale before they aired on Cartoon Network. But the difference was Dragon Ball was a established bona fide hit, so you could get away with a stunt like that. With Case Closed, it didn't get the numbers or the type of viewers that Cartoon Network wanted, and then on top of that, Funimation is already selling the next season on DVD, which gives Cartoon Network less of an incentive to renew the show. And then, of course, the other problem with the DVDs, and then I'd like to hear your thoughts on it, is, yeah, it did come at an awkward time where we were starting to transition to season sets, and Case Closed is way too long to be releasing at 3 episodes of DVD. That's insanely expensive, and the thing is, even before you went in and bought it, if you had heard about the show, you would hear at the time, oh yeah, there's over 300 episodes, and it's like, well, how many DVDs do I have to buy to get the whole set? It's going to be thousands of dollars, and now that'd be even worse. So I think the DVDs were a mistake in every regard.
Yeah, and I mean it's I would say too it's a shame that releasing episodes digitally back then at the beginning wasn't more of a, I would say, a commodity, because I think the digital release at the same time with full season releases on DVD, I think would have been a great complement to one another, just based on how long the series is. Just
Right.
giving some better buying options, but that came, and I think that just kind of came a little too little, too late in the game, sort of thing. So I just think the sheer amount of times it was released was a big factor, and people having to double and triple dip in some cases.
Well,
It wasn't necessarily all that appealing.
well, the double and triple dipping itself wasn't. That didn't contribute to the failure of Case Closed, because contacts at Funimation have confirmed that they did tweak it, and the thing was the initial releases, the 3 episodes, that didn't do very well. Then they decided to up it to 9 episodes, and that also didn't do well. And then they finally did the box sets. Now, the box sets were successful. In fact, they said that had the box sets numbers been what they had initially started with, Case Closed might have had a much brighter future in America. The problem was, at that point, one of the reasons the box sets were successful is because they had recouped their investment by that point. They weren't certain if box sets going forward would be enough to pay for new dubs and everything. That's why they did the movies at first, because when they were bringing more out there, they decided to commit to movies, and the numbers on the movies were successful but disappointing. Like, they were enough to turn money, but they weren't enough to install confidence that this was their next franchise.
Well, their selling point, because I got to chat with them a little bit. It was Justin Rojas back in the day. It was like 2011, and his whole selling point to me when I got to meet with him at Funimation at the movies was, that the series, they were not looking to order any more of the series, but the movies had done well enough where they had considered um, possibly licensing more. So I thought for sure, at least in that standpoint, at least maybe it could end up being a movie series, just based on that conversation. And then his whole thing is if the series was to come back, it would have to be some sort of live action show or something, and it be on one of the major networks, and then they could start looking at the anime. So kind of some off the wall sort of, I mean,
Which
out of
is
left
funny that he
field sort of
says
thing.
that because I don't think Funimation would have ever even looked into. I don't know what he was thinking. Like there would have never been a case, a production for a live action case closed in America. It just it never would have happened. Also, a show like this, I hate to point out, it's very hard to do a show like this live action because of a very, very obvious problem with live action, and that is that the kids get older.
Yeah, yeah, or you could just cut the kids out of it. I'd be okay with that, Heck.
Well, that would be an interesting direction to go. Basically, just have Jimmy Kudo as a adult. Um, for the record, for anyone listening, no, I do not consider the English names to be a detriment to the show's English release, with one little exception. Even as a hardcore sub-only fan back then, when it came to name changes and dubs, it was like, yeah, I kind of don't care if there's a subtitled version available.
I really, I'm talking about the feel about the show. I just, um, when you think about Case Closed in the English version, the Funimation version, it just feels like its own universe in so many ways. Separate from the Japanese version or even the Singapore version or, which are the two versions I've seen. It just feels like it's in its own universe. It has its own kind of camaraderie. And I really miss that.
Yeah,
It just, I don't know. You could feel the relationships between the characters. I think a lot more, than you could, I think, in the Japanese version, certainly. And you could feel like chemistry building blocks, and it just felt like it was a real running story and good callbacks throughout. I just always kind of felt that way about it, and I still feel that way about it when I watch it.
and honestly, I think most of the English voices are better. Like Richard Moore's English voice is so much better than the Japanese voice. I liked how they alternated between vocal Conan and internal Conan. I mean, I guess they kind of do that in the Japanese version, but it's not as obvious.
Not the same. It's certainly
Yeah,
not the same.
it's certainly not the same. And I mean, it was just one of those things where it's like, okay, name changes aside, and maybe some because Funimation just adapted. I mean, they still kept it pretty faithful for the most part, I think. But I just thought it was overall one of their best dubs, and it was. Truthfully, if this is what the Dragon Ball dub had been all along, I don't think people would have complained as much. But it's like, hey, look, we know it's not 100% the same, but we're trying to do something good here.
Yeah.
So and that probably colors my opinions of like the new dub just a little bit, but yeah, I really thought that the Funimation dub was something special, and I'm not surprised at all that all these years later there's still a very vocal group of fans who are saying like, well, I don't want any more of it unless it's done with the Funimation dub. Now, I'm not of that opinion. I'm like, no, I will take more gladly, even if I have to watch it subtitled, but I do miss the Funimation dub.
Yeah, and I think there was a good chemistry too between that group, and I think anybody you talked to that worked on it loved working on it and
Hmm.
really enjoyed working on it. Some of it was some of actors' very first projects. Like Kevin M. Connolly when we got to talk to him. It was like the first anime that he actually got to work on and voice in. So um,
Yep, and Jerry Jewell basically became a superstar in the
yeah.
anime world after that. So so actually, funny story. I don't know if this is true or not, but a Funimation employee said that at the time they were considering Vic Mignogna for adult Jimmy Kudo, but they passed because they thought he sounded too young.
Huh.
I don't know if that's true. I don't know if he was just messing with me or something, but that it's like, well, if that's true, that's very interesting.
That would
That
have
would have
been
been
interesting. That would have
Yeah,
been very interesting.
yeah. With all due respect to Vic, who I think is a good voice actor, I don't know if I would have liked that very much.
I don't know. I mean, I think he could have pulled it off. I think he's
he
pretty
might have been
versatile.
he might have been able to do both the adult and the young.
Which
That
yeah, which
that
I
might have been
is
the thought
interesting.
process.
Well, and that's what they did in the Singapore dub. Joe Murray got to play both characters, got to play the kid and the adult, and I mean, did a very good job with it. So, and played the dad too, played
Yeah.
Yasuko or Booker. So I mean, literally played the 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 male Kudo family.
Yeah. I want to stress to people listening, this was just one Funimation employee who told me. I don't know if this is actually true, so it's just an interesting thought process, though.
Yeah, I mean, and it's always fun to sit back and speculate. If who played this. And I will say on the current cast, I love really what Christina V is doing with Rachel or Ron or whatever anybody prefers. But I love where she's taken that character. I think she's done really well with her.
I I do like the. I guess we'll take a moment to talk about the new English dub. I do like the new dub for the most part. I do think it has one very bad performance though, and unfortunately, it's the main character.
Yeah, I've seen your
I
videos.
Yeah, and some people disagree with me, and they've tried to explain why Conan sounds the way he does, but I'm sorry, it sounds wrong in all the worst ways. It doesn't sound like a boy. It doesn't sound young. It literally sounds like an adult woman trying to sound young. And so we say, "Oh, well, that's because it's an adult and the kid's white." No, no, no. Like it doesn't sound like an intellectually adult person trying to like it. It sounds like an adult person trying to lower their voice to a kid. And it's not even acted very well, which is shocking because I like that voice actress in a lot of other things, but this. I mean, I've now had 3 movies to watch it in English, and it's like after 3 movies, I can safely say, no. If they decide to continue, that needs to be recast.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't necessarily sold for the first half of Zero the Enforcer. I do like her a lot more now. Overall, I mean, I don't know if anybody will ever replace Allison for me as Conan. To me, that's just Conan. But I think she's fine. I think, ultimately, I have to kind of watch this dub with a different perspective in the sense that I don't believe it's just for an American audience. I think this is like a worldwide, international sort of English dub. And so I can understand some of the casting to a degree to cater to a worldwide, international audience and not just a U.S. audience. I mean, the Scarlet Bullet has an English dub already, and that's not just for the United States. That will come out in several, English speaking countries.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's. I mean, I don't know. You're talking to someone who writes about film
Yeah.
for a living and not just
Yeah.
anime, and so I don't know. It's kind of like, look, if the performance is bad, the performance is bad. And
Sure.
again, love that actress. She's been in other things that she's been perfect at. And it doesn't even have to be Allison coming back. I mean, like I said, I would prefer the Funimation actors to almost all of the ones in the new dub, but the new dub is fine for the most part. But this particular voice just is wrong on multiple levels.
Well, it's fine. I really wish they would have let, Kevin M. Connolly come back and voice Harley, but that's for another day. I was
Yeah,
a little salty about that one, but he was fantastic in movie 23, so, you know.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I'm, you
yeah.
know.
So anyway, but I'm gonna take my little wins, as they say, and say like, well, I'm glad. I was so happy to finally be able to buy a new case closed product and on Blu-ray nonetheless. Because I'm gonna be honest. Look, I bought case closed many times from Funimation because I just love the show and I wanted to support it and wanted to hopefully get another season out of them. And after a while, I kind of felt like I was in an abusive relationship with Funimation. And I don't know if anyone else feels this way, where it's like, okay, look, we're releasing this new release of Case Closed, and if it sells well, we might do more. of the show, and it's like, okay, so I'm gonna buy them. Like, oh, we've got a save edition. If you buy these, we might do more. It's like, okay, I'll buy them. And it's like, hey, it's coming out digitally. If those sales are good, we might do more. And it's like, okay, I'm kind of feeling like you're not being entirely truthful right now, but okay. So that's what I meant earlier when I said, like, I probably bought these releases way more for what I got out of it, because basically I just got a bunch of empty promises that something more would come, and it never did.
Well, what an interesting history. I mean, I think Lupin is the only thing that could possibly sort of compare, but not necessarily, in the sense that a show was acquired in 2003, and they really, I mean, they did the same episodes fairly early on. I mean, for the most part, they were done recording anything new by, even movie-wise by, 2007, maybe, early 2008, and
Hmm.
literally held that license for another decade, constantly renewing it every few years and doing nothing more with it other than recycling it and selling it again and again and again. It's so strange. And so they literally held that license for 15 years.
Well, the reason
You
they
know.
did that was because Case Closed, and this is what my contacts have told me. Case Closed was successful enough to keep the license, especially if it was going to keep it out of the competitor's hands, but it wasn't successful enough in their eyes to continue dubbing more of it, and they basically held on to it more or less to keep Viz or Genion or ADV. Keep in mind, folks, they held the license for a long time. They basically didn't want a competitor to get it, and I think finally they just maxed out how many times they could renew the license, and so it finally just lapsed. But I mean, there was a clause in there that said, yeah, you could continue to renew the license, but if you renew the license this many times and then you didn't do anything new, anything with it, then the rights, it would not be renewed anymore.
Yeah, just it's a crazy when you think about it, the history of the series and the anime. I don't know of another show, that in recent memory for me that would really be that way. And so, or have those, similar sort of circumstances, happen. It's just um, kind of crazy. And I know that, over time, it certainly made the company a little bit uncomfortable. They didn't want people asking about it or inquiring about it. And,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, it's kind of like
you
Disney when you say, hey, is Song of the South ever coming on DVD? And they're kind of like, we don't talk about that.
yeah.
That was kind of Funimation with Case Closed. It's like, whenever you would say, so I'm a fan of Case Closed at the conventions, you could see everyone just rolling their eyes and getting uncomfortable, like, oh God, we got to talk about this again.
Yeah, and I mean I'm sure it's a huge commitment. The series is a huge commitment in doing it, and it may be why we never see a series or a case closed series get dubbed again. It's just because of how much of a commitment it is. Um,
Yeah, I've
you
got
know.
thoughts on that, but I'll save them till the end.
Oh, of course. No, I
uh,
understand.
but yeah, it is on its surface, it is a huge commitment. And then Case Closed has now, unfortunately, it fell into like a little bit of an awkward thing where it's like, I think more people talk about it and it still has interest, but now the problem is the first, what, 400 episodes are in like standard definition. They didn't switch to high def till a third into the now almost 1,000 episodes. If we might have even hit 1,000 for all I know. And so it's like now it's hard. Like, how do you introduce a show to a modern audience that's that 96 should not be that old, but it looks like it's from the 90s, and it's like, how do you introduce it now? That's why I was actually happy they did the episode one movie, because it's like, oh, that's a great way to do it. Make a high definition version of the beginning.
Well, and the fact that that was, released over here too, was really big. I mean, you could do what they're doing, in Japan and on Netflix, where they've remastered, 1 to 42 and have released them. You could easily do that for, a digital or a Blu-ray collection, but you'd have to constantly be doing that for the episodes you don't have in high definition. So the question
Right.
is, how costly will that be? And most likely those remasters those would have to come from Japan. I don't see
Well,
a U.S.
well,
company doing that.
and the remasters aren't really what people think they are. They're basically just cropping the animation and reanimating certain things to make it fit in the widescreen format, but it's a very compromised look of the episodes. Like because some people say and some people say like, oh well, they did it for The Simpsons and South Park. It's like, well, with The Simpsons they cropped image, and people complain about that because jokes get cut. And South Park was different, with the exception of the first episode, which they left untouched. It was all a digital show, so they basically reanimated the first 20 seasons to make it widescreen. So it's a true restoration. But the Case Closed remastering isn't that. So while I do agree that that probably is okay to introduce a new audience, as a purist, I'm not exactly thrilled about it.
Well, and for me, I don't think that that's realistically going to happen anyway because of the
Right.
time and investment that it would take to just go through that process. It would be nice to see parts of the series in English, like maybe I've always talked about over the years, do some sort of essentials collection where you take important arcs of the story and convert them into an English version
Which,
without
which
doing the
fans
whole show.
which fans technically kind of do already. There's like a very good episode guide out there. I think it's on Detective Conan World Wiki. And the episode guide actually has markers next to episodes to indicate, there's a new character introduced in this episode, something important happens, the relationship develops. The Phantom Thief kid is in this one, and it's like, well, that's a good way to like kind of look. And it's like, okay, so if you're a newcomer and you don't want to go through all 1,000 episodes, you could probably cut the show down to 300 to 400 with that. And even though it's a wildly fun show, and it's one of the reasons why I recommend watching every single episode, I also know that time is precious and short, and maybe trimming the fat isn't entirely a bad thing. In fact, me and my wife we're nearly finished with it. We're watching Dragon Ball Z Kai, which a lot of Dragon Ball Z fans don't like because they essentially do a lot of trimming there, and they cut the series down in half. But as I'm older now and I'm watching it, it's like, man, I could never go back to Dragon Ball Z. Like, not after this. This is so much better. Things happen
Yeah.
at a much better pace now.
Yeah, I mean, and just the time invested. But we also do live in the binge watching age, which is why I think the show could find some success as well. If you're looking for something to binge, talk about never ending.
I I was surprised that when Funimation did the digital release, well, first of all, I am surprised that they pulled the advertising for the digital release 2 days before it went up. That was odd. But then I was surprised that it didn't go to like Netflix or something as well, and it was pretty much on their own website. I think like that didn't seem like the wisest thing to do.
Well, the release to Netflix was very odd when they did the sub versions because they only literally did a chunk of that and then they never revisited that again. It did TMS, so that was a little strange. I will say I'm very very happy with Crunchyroll and their I would say commitment to it. I mean they've lost and gained episodes in certain parts and now that seems to be everything's okay and they're holding steady. But I do appreciate their commitment to it,
Yeah, pretty.
especially in Germany where they've put out the first 10 movies on Crunchyroll.
Yeah, no, Crunchyroll. They're doing the fans a solid, and I mean, that was another thing that was weird about this whole Funimation thing. Like, would things have been different? Because Funimation had a streaming service and they had a channel, and it's like people were even suggesting, well, why don't you just start releasing some of the later episodes subtitled only? Just you have the license to them, but they had, and to a certain extent still do, have a very strong like, no, no, no. If we can't dub it, we're not releasing it. And
Yeah.
I don't think that's uh, I don't think that's very productive if you're in the anime business.
Well, and for the channel I don't ever believe released past episode 52. I think they
No.
literally ran 1 through 52 on the channel and never even put out the later episodes that they had available. And so, I mean, that was kind of a missed opportunity, but at the same time, I think there were a lot of missed opportunities with it, and at the same time, I think now you can see, I think with fans' response about it, coming back, that it does do actually very well, and in the format that it has come back on in Blu-ray and digital. I just looked on Right Stuff the other day. The Crimson Love Letter is listed as a top seller item, and Zero the Enforcer and Episode 1 are sold out. So
Yeah.
people have
I mean,
an appetite for it.
yeah. Now, I do want to talk about the number one problem I think Case Closed had in America, and some people see where I'm coming from, some people don't. I think the name was a problem.
Yeah.
I think the name was probably the biggest issue, and the reason I tell you that is, can I have been telling people about the show for more than 15 years, and every single time I mention it, they say, "Oh, you mean Cold Case?" I mean, to put this into perspective for some of the more modern listeners, that's akin to recommending someone buy the Wii U, and you hear the response, "But I already have a Wii." Like, no, it's something different. And when you have to constantly explain that, you're not going to get very far in selling it. And I'm frankly surprised they're still doing it. Now, the context for all this is that when they released it back in 2004, there was a couple lawsuits going on that were spearheaded by, I think it was some network that decided they didn't want to be whatever they were, and they were going to call their new channel Spike TV, which is now the Paramount Network. And Academy Award winning director Spike Lee, who directed movies like Do the Right Thing and Black Klansman, who had not been working for a long time at that point, and really his career was in a gutter. I think this was done for publicity. He sued Spike TV and said that they could not name the channel that because it was his name. Which, for the record, his legal name isn't even Spike, and that's why the lawsuit fell apart. But unfortunately, that started a trend of other actors and writers and directors suing other companies for using, quote-unquote, their names in their property. So when they decided to bring Detective Conan over, they were debating, well, shoot, who are we going to get sued by the makers of Conan the Barbarian? We're going up against Conan O'Brien. Is he going to personally sue us if we release the show's Detective Conan? So they came up with this name, Case Closed, and I personally think it was a moot point because the character is still called Conan. So I don't even know if maybe that was even the real reason. Maybe they just wanted to use Case Closed because they thought it was a better name, and that was the excuse they gave. Because again, it seems weird that they would be concerned about like calling a show Detective Conan where a character in the show is constantly referred to as Detective Conan. But whatever. So I think that name was a bad name, and it's held on for years. And when they had the new Blu-ray, I'm not entirely sure why they're still using the name when, by all indications, it seems like they don't want to anymore, because the slipcover has the Case Closed name, but the inside cover, it says Detective Conan. The disc says Detective Conan. I think the menus, if I remember, say Detective Conan. The only reason I think of why they'd want to keep it is because the manga has been released as Case Closed for so long here at this point. And by the way, for all the people who said that buying the manga in America would not make a difference in Case Closed success in America, no, I want to say it right now. The manga kept Case Closed alive in America because that was the only Case Closed merchandise you could buy, and that's why I told people, if you want more of the show, buy the books, because they're the only new thing you can buy that you can support and show that there's interest in that property. So yeah, Funimation might not be getting that money, but people are noticing, hey, it's constantly on the New York Times bestsellers list for graphic novels. So the name was a mistake, and I don't know why. I thought this would have been a good time to finally just say, you know what, it didn't work. Let's reboot it, so to speak, in America, and now it's Detective Conan, which is a much more distinctive name, has a much catchier ring to it, and hey, it finally even caught the attention of Conan O'Brien, who did a whole few episodes on the property, and boy, where would the show have been had it been called Detective Conan early on, and he did that 15 years ago?
Yeah, I think it's hard to say. I think now that the show is kind of, what's the good word, pigeonholed in a certain way because, it's been called Case Closed for so long. I think they now don't want to further confuse the fans that were fans of the series before that maybe just aren't aware. Um, and because of the manga and the various releases, Funimation holding it and releasing it as Case Closed for 15 years, I think a lot of that was just done because they're kind of in a weird place with it as far as not wanting to confuse people, but at the same time, I think they really want to use that Detective Conan name.
So, so here's the solution. Here's my solution, anyway. I don't know if it's a good one. You call it Case Closed: The Mysteries of Detective Conan.
Yeah, I mean that could work. It's just how would fitting that onto a Blu-ray cover might be a little more complicated though, you know.
Uh, well, we they found ways to do it for the melancholy of Haruzume.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's true. Um, I don't know. I think the more releases that come, the more possibilities that exist for the series. I think right now they're so focused on the films and just trying to make sure that they market those correctly. And I'm
Uh,
very excited to see the digital films, get a proper Blu-ray release this year, hopefully.
yeah, I think we're gonna have films for just a little while because unfortunately, and this is you see, I don't know. This is actually why my recommendation would have been to keep the old Funimation voice actors and the name changes, despite some of people's iffiness with them, because it's like, okay, look, you obviously want to focus on the films first before you jump back into the show. But once you recast everyone and you go back to the original names, well, originally, if you had the Funimation actors, it would be much easier to put the original dubbed episodes on Netflix or something as a bingeable thing while you worked on new episodes. But now you basically have to start all over with the dub of the show, and those movies have to sell really well for you to want to do that.
Do you think that that's going to happen? Do you think that they would eventually table the films and start, I mean, or do both at one point? You think they would just have a new cast for the series?
No, not unless they had a partner. So let me put it this way. If you're talking about just direct to consumer, like on DVD and stuff, then no. I think they'll do more movies, but I don't think the show's coming back at that point. Um, if they made a partnership with, like, say, they go to like Netflix, for example, and say, hey, you know how, $10 million gets you one season of Stranger Things? I know it costs more than that, people, but just hear me out. Well, you could get 10 seasons of this show for half that. And then they might be able to do it. Now, you can shelve that idea if and only if they decide to do the controversial thing where they basically do a case closed Kai release. Whereas they basically look through the series and they say, okay, we're going to dub the series, but now we're going to only do the episodes that are important to the story and the character development, and maybe Kaito Kid because he's awesome and we can sell the spin-off show. Unless those aspects are in there, we'll skip the episode. And I mean, you can save a lot of space, and now all of a sudden 23 episodes moves a lot farther than it did originally, because one thing about Case Closed is it is not a story heavy show. In fact, I think you even mentioned this in a podcast years ago. When you watch the first season of Case Closed, there's really only 4 or 5 episodes that are story important, and the rest
Yeah.
are just their own individualized thing. So that's like, you don't even find out about the Black organization until a season and a half after they're introduced.
Yeah, and I mean, you're kind of that first season is so interesting because you're watching it, anticipating it really building on that, and you're mostly building on that relationship. I would say more with Richard, Rachel, and just kind of the cases and getting involved with that necessarily. And the the black organization is more of an afterthought from Conan's perspective, as far as like he's thinking about it, but it's not really what the driving force of that first season really is. So,
Yep. And then ironically, the anime even took the black members out of an episode. So originally they were on the train with the bomb, but for some reason the anime makers decided to make them two different men.
yeah, which was a
Which
little odd.
yeah, yeah, so that was yeah, I don't know. I do remember having at one point a feeling of, and it must have been like 30 episodes into the show, and I was still liking it, but I realized those they're not going to talk about the organization again, are they?
Yeah.
Yeah, they did at some point, but you kind of have that realization that the hook of the show that got you into it in the first place is basically being ignored right after that.
Yeah, and I think the good news for people like you and me, I think there were other aspects of the show that we could really gravitate towards and really like. I just love it because I think to me it's just the greatest show on TV. It's not just my favorite anime; it's my favorite just show in general, and I love watching it from fillers to the films to all of those aspects. It's just my favorite show of all time, and so I think if you were somebody who really wasn't, you know, into those side stories and the the filler episodes, maybe it is a bit of a challenge for you to really crave that. I
I think
watch it in anticipation of those things coming at some point.
yeah, well, and I think it's a show for fans of mystery because that
Yeah.
is really who they're catering to. And in fact, it was always weird because one of I heard several times from people from Funimation say, "Yeah, dramas just don't sell well for us." And I always thought that was weird, like, but it's not. I mean, it's not really a drama. It's a mystery show, and when you look through their advertisements and stuff, they emphasize the murders and the action, yes, but they almost seem ashamed of the fact that it's like Sherlock Holmes. Like it's literally a modern day Sherlock Holmes. It's a whodunit, and maybe they felt that wouldn't sell, but at the same time, aren't you selling it to an audience that might not appreciate it?
Right. And I think that there are so many fans, here in the States that especially, that really grew up with that Funimation dub that really do feel a connection to it. And I do think that as long as that was in place, there was always a market, for it to come back. And I'm so glad that, it's Bang Zoom that's doing it. I do think that at some point in the future, if they ever did do a series, and it did come back, my question would be, would it be Bang Zoom doing it, or would it be a different group doing it? Will we have a separate dub from what we would see in a TV series again? Your scenario talking about like a Case Closed Kai is pretty similar to what I was talking about with just something like Case Closed Essentials. It's the same premise, really. How would that be received, and would TMS do something where it was, Dragon Ball Z being separate from Dragon Ball Kai? Would they even consider that? Because I think it would have to be something that would come from them in Japan first, for it to work here.
Yeah, I, if I were the companies selling people on the idea, I think the compromise would be, be honest with the fans and say, okay, look, here's the thing. We're going to start dubbing Case Closed again with the new cast, but that is very expensive. So here's what we're going to have to do. We are going to have to, at first, only do the essential episodes. Now, once we get through those, and if sales are above what we expect them to be, we do plan to go back and do complete box sets if these ones do well. But on the off chance, but it's had a very shaky history in sales. So on the off chance the sales aren't strong enough for us to do that, we want people to get the essential story first, and we want to make sure that gets completed.
And I think that would be fair, and I think fans would be receptive to it. I think the fans just want communication, and I think, the whole reason I started even doing a podcast was I would go onto the Funimation forums, and there'd be all this, I would say just terrible misinformation of, well, this is why they're not doing the show, well, this is why it's not, working, or, they don't want you to talk about it, or, we don't
Yeah.
talk about that here, and it's like, does
Well,
anybody in the community have a real voice?
well,
Can anybody be heard?
well, and why didn't Funimation kickstart season 6? I mean, all they did was they gave I know they don't have to, and I know they don't have to give people information on their sales charts technically because they are a private company, but all they did was they said, it just didn't sell enough, and it's like, well, what is enough to get a 6th season? And hey, look, they were bugging about it so long. Put a Kickstarter and put a price in, and do what other anime companies do. Okay, hey, look, you want this? This is how much it's going to cost. If we can get this much, it's done. If we can't get this much, then that's why we didn't. You're not getting season 6. Um,
I
but
could agree with that, but how would the Japanese feel about that?
yeah,
That would be my next question because of how they hold the property so dear. That's one thing Joe Murray had even expressed to me working on the Singapore dub was, I don't know why it wasn't renewed, but I do know that it was a property that they had taken very seriously, and maybe they just deemed it too, pricey or coveted it in a certain way. Maybe it wasn't
yeah,
an option.
yeah. I do know that there are things about the Japanese companies. Uh, Not only their stranglehold on it, but their expectations of it that we have not discussed. I mean, one of the reasons that the show is expensive is because they see how successful it's been everywhere else. So in their minds, well, this is how it should be this successful over in America. And it's like, well, in my opinion, it should be, but the fact of the matter is it's not. So, maybe you can't be charging the the same in America for the rights as you are in the Philippines and France and places where it is an established and popular show.
I don't think it's nearly as pricey for them to do the English version now, though, as it used to be, because, I mean, I think they're spearheading most of this, um, for the
Well,
most part.
maybe they realized. I mean, no offense to Crunchyroll by any stretch, but when you go from dealing with Funimation, who's doing dubs and getting you on Cartoon Network, and now you're going to Crunchyroll where there's no English dub, and even though it's like the number one anime streaming site out there, it's basically the 15th most popular streaming site in the world. I'm sure that's got to be a little bit of humble pie.
I'm sure it is for them. How cool would it be for them to get the rights, or somehow secure the rights back to that original English version to put back on there? Because there was a brief time period where the English version was on Crunchyroll, in
Yeah,
its entirety. So, to tie that in with what currently is on there, um, I think would really help the direction for it, at least as it pertains to that single entity as Crunchyroll.
yeah. Now here's an interesting hypothetical. What if, say, the movies are are done well enough that they decide that they do want to do more episodes and they're willing to sell the license for cheaper, and then Funimation steps in and they say, "Hey, we'll continue the show at this price and we'll bring back all the old voice actors and everything." Would you want that to happen, knowing there's a chance that Funimation could basically stop it once a few years down the line and then hold the license for another decade? Would that be a worthy enough risk to get the old voice actors back?
No, I
No.
don't. I don't think so because I think they've already proven. I'm not saying that they've proven they can't make it work. I think I don't necessarily put all the reasons that it didn't work on them. I just don't know necessarily that it would be a priority for them or the show would get the kind of recognition that it would need. I think that by right now, to be honest with you, and this is a little controversial to say, I think the show has already proven through the movie sales that fans out here would want the series. I don't think that they would buy the entire 1,000 plus episodes of the series. I think that
Well,
it takes some finessing and some real thought into how you're going to move the series forward. But they did even say, on their website late last year that they had a master plan for the series
Yeah.
and
Well,
how they wanted to handle it in the U.S. So
right.
when is
Well,
that going to be revealed?
right. Well, and the reason that, and I'm going to have to give them credit on this one, the reason you would have a hard time getting people to buy the 1,000 episodes is partly because people don't like buying shows anymore on average. I mean, and even I find that way. Like, look, I'm a big physical media collector. I have a YouTube channel about it and everything. But thanks to streaming, I I'm much more careful about what movies and shows I buy on disc, and the show has to be an especially good show for me to buy it on disc because realistically, how often do you rewatch shows in entirety? It's
Yeah.
not often at the end of the day. I've watched season 1 of Heroes several times, as I have Breaking Bad and Maison Koku and Sailor Moon and stuff like that, but I actually sold a lot of anime DVDs several years ago because it's like it was an impressive collection, but at the end of the day, it was just taking up shelf space. I wasn't actually watching them, and I would buy Case Closed, but not a lot of people would, which is why going forward, we can probably expect the movies. And yeah, they would probably have to prioritize the show for streaming and then maybe either do Kickstarter limited edition box sets for the show because I don't know if that we're not at that time anymore where people just buy all their shows on DVDs. They're a lot more selective about what they buy now.
I think there's some diehards that would, and maybe TMS is open to it. I do like them being more involved with the English version, having a little more say on how that production kind of plays out, because I do think that maybe even the first time around, maybe that should have been the case to some degree, but licensing to Funimation, I think, meant that that wasn't necessarily going to be a possibility. For me, I would love a company to have the rights to do the series that are actually fans of the series themselves. And I know that sounds a tad bit unrealistic in a lot of ways, but I think for it to be successful and to be a success, I think you have to have some really passionate people that love the series anyway driving that bus and that understand the U.S. market and are willing to drive the bus and go through the ups and downs that you can go through with a series like this, working it.
Right. Right. Well, I would like fans to have a say in, say, distributing, like helping with the distribution, maybe not creating. That's a little different. I've seen fans for other properties say, "Oh, you should make the movies this way because fans want it that way." It's like, yeah, if fans had their way, the series would never be good.
Oh, I still think. Oh well, don't get me wrong. I think TMS should still be heavily involved and their influence be felt. But I do mean in a lot of ways with the release. I think as far as casting and all that goes, I think they're always going to have their hand in that. Um,
Yeah, well,
from now on.
even the simple thing of like going to the fans, which I don't think Funimation either was aware of or maybe they couldn't actually ask the fans. Maybe their hands were tied to a certain extent. Like, go to the people who like the show and say, okay, what is it that makes you watch this show? And that question goes a very long way on how you should be selling this.
I mean, shoot, I could get behind, like a Conan, like a Conan Con or some sort of expo that just promoted the series, where you got, diehard fans together and, got feedback and they're
Yeah,
out there. I think, one thing I learned early on doing podcast is there's some diehard fans that really have a hunger for Conan.
yeah, yeah. Now, I will say, and this kind of proved, I think fans proved this Funimation when I think it was Discotek, when they released the Lupin the Third versus Detective Conan DVDs. I have it on good authority that those sold way better than they thought they would, and like it was clear that someone other than Lupin fans were buying those discs, and I I think that was like a real physical testament, even years later, that yes, the Case Closed fan base, they're still here, and they will buy things, even if it's a couple of, for lack of a better term, crappy crossover specials. Which, I'm sorry if everyone out there likes the crossovers, that's fine. I thought they sucked.
Right.
I bought them, but uh, didn't open them because I'd already seen them and I already knew that I didn't like them. But I bought them anyway.
But it was a new piece of Conan property that people wanted, and I'm glad that you know that because I didn't ever have an inkling as to how those did. I just was like, please buy this, please buy this, please buy this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So there's a guy who works. I know his name's Justin, and it's not Justin Savakis for those of you wondering. But I do know Savakis. And he said like, yeah, we sold about an additional 40 to 50,000 copies more than we expected to, which, on average than what a Loop on the Third DVD usually does. So, not official numbers. It's just what someone told me, but it doesn't sound like a lot to people, but you have to keep in mind, Discotek, they're basically an anime rescuer. They buy properties that have been abandoned by other companies and they can get for dirt cheap, and they take whatever materials are there. So they have an idea of like, okay, this is what the Lupin series sell, and it's a very niche product, but then the Lupin versus Detective Conan DVD sold better than most of their Lupin releases. So they noticed. They're not really in a position to do anything, and full disclosure, they're not working on this, but I'm really hoping they kind of don't go for Detective Conan just yet, because if Discotek goes after the property, we get the Funimation dub back, but then after 154, whatever episode we left off at, it would just be subtitled only, and like that's because all their properties they're working on a very strict budget.
Yeah, and I can understand that. I do believe, and it's obviously it's just rumored, but it certainly looks promising that they could be working on those crossover specials, an English version of those. So, um, I think that would be cool to add to the library. Ultimately, who
Yeah,
knows what any of this is going to lead to. I do see them continuing to distribute the films for sure, though.
yeah. Now I'm curious. I'm curious. I don't know for sure because we haven't discussed this, but I think we might be on the same thing. But when it comes to American releases of Case Closed stuff, what was the most frustrating thing that we either did or didn't get in America from Case Closed?
From the series, like what we
Like
never
just
had
just just
released.
just anything just anything in general. I know we haven't discussed it, but I would be a little surprised if we weren't on the same page on this one.
The number one frustration is that we never got to the 129 Hybera introduction, and it was literally 6 to 7 episodes away. That's why even in my own fan dub, I literally picked up where the series left off, and then literally built to that point because I think it broke my heart and it broke so many fans' hearts that you didn't even get to that introduction. And
Hmm.
had we, I mean, I'm not gonna say for sure, but I think it really would have opened the door to some really cool things. I really
And
am.
and that might have even kept the desire to keep going from fans here, other than that basically non-cliffhanger ending we did. So that wasn't quite what I was thinking of. That was number two, though. My biggest frustrating thing with the whole Case Closed situation: how on earth did they actually fully translate and fully dub a Wii Case Closed game that never came to America?
Yeah, that is
I, I,
interesting, and I
I,
do know Kevin M. Connolly said they even recorded that at Otakon 5000. He had recorded his lines at Otakon for that.
yeah, I mean, with all the shovelware that came out for Wii, you wouldn't put this out in America. I mean, it must have had some brand recognition, and of course, because of region locking, you can't even easily import it.
Yeah, yeah, it's I've had to watch a lot of how to or whatever Let's Play sequences just to see. And I didn't really even want it for the gameplay. I wanted it for the voice work because that's new voice work, from the
Mm-hmm.
cast that I would have loved to have seen. But I know, Kevin said he had worked on it, and that might have actually probably been the last thing that he did work on for it, back then anyway. So,
Yeah, well, I've got a copy of the game that I can't play.
oh,
And even though you can emulate it, unfortunately, the Wii is such a kooky little contraption. There's no satisfying way to play it the way you're supposed to.
yeah, I would have loved to have played it though. I mean, that would have been. I mean, had it been released here, who knows what doors that would have opened. I just think, I'm just. That's why you asked about Funimation getting it again in the voices. A lot of people would be so surprised to hear me say no. I just would like another company to have a shot at it and to really have their chance to release it. My whole thing is you had it for 15 years, started, stopped, online, one foot in the door, one foot out the door. I would really like to see another company come through and say, okay, we're going to do it and we're going to do it this way and this is our plan and move it forward. I would really like transparency with the brand going forward and having some real information of this is what we're going to do and this is how and why. Um, and just have it go from there. I think a lot of people in the community would. I mean, I think there's so many people that are frustrated, in
Yeah.
regards to that.
Yeah, and there's some. It would be good for the company to have like a real strong sense of what a company's going to do. That's one of the reasons why Sailor Moon was not in America for a long time. Aside from the fact they wanted to kind of give it a break to let demand build up again, but when they decided to put it back in the market, basically all the companies that wanted it had to put forward like a package, like this is how we're going to release it, this is what we're going to do with it, this is the plan. And they decided, okay, we think Viz Media, they understand this, so we're going to give it to them. And I'd like to see that happen with Detective Conan. And they might even be in that process because, again, we've got at least 3 movies on Blu-ray. They've all sold well. Clearly, they found their voices. They found some of their partners in America. They say they have a blueprint. I'm hoping that is true. And I mean, now it's like it's, as they say, a bittersweet victory because at the end of the day, of course, I'm heartbroken that the Funimation cast will not get to do more of it because I do think they did the best job. But
Yes.
by the same token, I'm glad that that something's finally happening where we can now get more. Um, Granted, I've been buying the books for how long, and I've always anticipated the new release. I think I'm at 78 now, so it's like it never truly went away from me. I was always able to keep up to date with it that way, but it's just nice to see that there's going to be more of the show that we can watch, and now maybe my wife can watch it. Because, well, actually, I take that back. She did finally watch we watched the episode 0 or episode 1 movie,
Yeah.
and we watched it in English, and she had never seen it before, and she liked it quite a bit. Um, and then, by the way, she watched a few episodes of the TV show and said that, oh, this is much better. Why weren't these actors in the movie? And I think I got 5 minutes through explaining the situation where she said, "Oh, okay, honey. Clearly, you understand. I'll take your word for it."
It's such a long story, I will say I did appreciate a decent amount of the new voices. I thought Gin and Vodka were really good for um, episode 1. I thought they sounded pretty good. I would certainly like to hear them in more key episodes down the road, but um,
Yeah,
you know
yeah, that would be nice. But I knew that the Case Closed fandom was strong, much stronger than anyone wanted to admit. And the reason I knew that is because the Case Closed articles that I wrote, those were some of my most read articles on
really.
on Examiner. Like, I think the only article that I can think of at the top of my head that got more reads was unfortunately the very personal and tragic one about when my sister-in-law died on her honeymoon of all things, and I recalled a story when she discovered the Bone book by Jeff Smith. I think that's the only other article I wrote for that site that got way more readers. But otherwise, Case Closed articles were very, very highly read. Like we're talking about the tens of thousands of views
Really? Holy
compared to
cow.
the usually several hundred to a couple thousand reads. So that's how I knew that there was like a hidden fan base that was a force to be reckoned with if someone could just figure that out.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. I think misinformation and I think having good structured articles talking about specific topics related to the show, which, I mean, back then there was so much of, people really craving wanting a season six and, not knowing really how to kind of support the series and just tons of misinformation. And my message, I mean, for 10 years, and I think for even now, is buy the series in some capacity. Not buying it and streaming it online is just not. You're not doing any service to it. Now, if you have a Crunchyroll account, watch it on Crunchyroll. I think that's
Right.
a big best way to go. I pay a premium subscription to Crunchyroll just to watch Case Closed. I'm not really a huge anime fan of anything crazy. I mean, I grew up on Inuyasha, Dragon Ball Z, Yu-Gi-Oh, but this is a show that I just watch because I enjoy it, and I'm gonna support the people who actually work on it. So, or that are a part of it being here in the States. So that's why I pay my $60 a year thing to, or whatever it is now, to Crunchyroll, because I want to support Crunchyroll. They're the reason the series is over here, and they're still simulcasting and doing all that. So I've always
Yeah.
encouraged people buy the series in some capacity. Your point about the manga is perfect. That does nothing but helps the series, and that part of that piece of property for Conan, you're right, never went away, and they're still releasing it, and it does well.
Yeah. Yeah. But and I might even go back to what I was talking about earlier about the demographics not being what they wanted, because that's kind of a perfect example. I mean, talk about they might have had a point about those fans just not buying anything because, and you know this, you've done the save case close movement. How many people do you argue with where they're basically trying to figure out how can I support the show without paying for it? Can I just stream it on Kiss Anime and support it? No,
Tons of
no.
people, because they'll just leave comments of where can I stream this or where can I just watch it online, and it's like it's very frustrating because your message in for in my case it could be 15 to 20 straight episodes of a podcast is really, I'm encouraging you guys, please go out and buy the series. And by the way, a lot of people that listened actually did go out and buy the series because of what we were saying, but you certainly did have a good size audience that was like, well, I just want to stream it online too, and that became a little bit frustrating and led to
Right.
some
Well,
frustration.
right. And well, now we're in the new era of. I'm going to say it's a new era of entitled anime fans, and let me make it absolutely clear because I've been around the anime scene for a long time, since 1994, I think. Geez, I'm old, but uh, cheap anime fans is nothing new. And right now, I'm seeing crazy YouTube videos where they're actually saying like, hey, pirate your anime because Crunchyroll and Funimation have these sucky layouts on the app, and it's like that is not a reason to pirate anime just because you don't like the setup of the app. Can you watch the show? Then you pay for it. But I remember in '99, people would say, "I don't like the logo of the on the DVD cover," or "I don't like the fact that the next episode previews are gone, so I'm not gonna buy the DVD. I'm just gonna download it on BitTorrent." It's like, ah, anime fans don't change in some ways. They just they want to get something for nothing.
Well, and that's, I mean, for the audience, you know, I think that there was a big chunk of people that straight up just didn't buy it or didn't make an effort to. And I wish
Yeah.
that had we had all of the, well, at least a 60 to 70% commitment on that side, where could the show have gone and what could have happened? I think nowadays, yeah, there's still a lot of that going on. But at the same time, I think now the numbers are really speak for themselves. I mean, if you can log into Right Stuff, for example, or go on to Amazon and look at, sellers lists and see, that they're doing very, very well, what a great indicator that is. You don't have specific numbers, but if you see top seller, or sold out and more on the way, I mean, it's moving, and that's a great, great sign.
Yeah, well, and I remember when Case Closed dubbed episodes were on YouTube for free because Funimation wasn't doing a good job of policing that. And in all honesty, that probably should have been our first indication that Case Closed was not long for the Texas company. But I remember episodes of that show had tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of episodes. And it's like, is there really no way to channel this into sales or money? So, anyway, is there any other topics we need to do?
Goodness, gosh, we have covered so much, really. I do want to get your thoughts though, because we did talk about the films in the beginning. What do you make of that release cycle? Because if memory serves, we got one. Movie one was '06, and then it was movie two was '07, late '07, November of '07, if I remember correct. And then we didn't even see. Then all of a sudden we get the cluster of 3 through 6, all at the very beginning of basically 2010. What's that? How do you feel about that? And what do you make of the release?
Are you saying 2010 or 2020? Like, are we talking about like the new?
No, I'm talking
thing?
3 through 6 didn't even. They all literally came out in a
Oh,
cluster in
oh yeah.
2010.
Um. Well, that was that was bad. That showed, first of all, when you do something like that, it's best to have a consistent release schedule, which that was not. But when we got like all three of those basically at the same time, and heck, I couldn't even buy them all at once. So I remember it took like a year down the road before I finally got the final one. That was one more indication that Funimation was basically dumping the series, like they were burning it off. I mean, it's really akin to, and the best example I can think of is you have a show on TV that's on Sunday or Tuesday or something for a little while, and then it goes away for a couple of months, and then when it comes back, they're airing 4 episodes, brand new episodes every Saturday. It's like, okay, you clearly have lost interest in this. You're burning it off.
Yeah.
And that's that was definitely what Funimation did. I mean, if I with Funimation, look, I'm not a marketer. Obviously, I've gone to school for business, but I ultimately got my degree in journalism. Uh, the logical thing to me would be to do either 2 or 3 movies a year and have them come out the same months every year. Like, I would do 2 a year, like make them events 2 a year, then basically you're doing something with the property for 3 years, which should also be enough time to figure out if this is worth continuing. But yeah, doing one a year, the momentum dries up fast, and then they released all at once, at which case people won't have money to buy them all.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, it's just, and I understand that they had received, basically bought the rights to the 6 films at the same time. So, why the release was that sporadic, I don't know. And even at the announcement, I remember they had said, I know people keep asking about the series, but we don't know about that right now, but we got more Case Closed movies. It's like,
Yeah,
okay. I mean,
yeah, yeah. I
so,
I also find it interesting. I don't know, maybe maybe this is something we could talk about, but I found it very fascinating that movie 6 was their best-selling title, which
I didn't know that.
yeah, which is interesting because movie 6 is probably the least Detective Conan movie out of all the movies they've made. It's I mean, it's so different, in fact, that it's like I would not show that to someone if I was introducing the series because that's not what you're going to get when you watch the show.
Yeah, I mean it was totally different. Definitely different from my favorite in the franchise when they had put the films. I loved Captured in Her Eyes. That was my favorite.
And that was probably the most like the TV series of the ones they released.
That was so good. To me, that was so good. I didn't even know that that had sold the most at all. I would have figured maybe it would have been Countdown to Heaven. Maybe that had
Yeah.
sold the most, or Last Wizard of the Century, even because of the
Y-
Kaido Kid or Phantom Thief Kid.
Yeah, yeah, but no, the one where they go to the virtual reality game, that was the best-selling Case Closed movie in America.
Wow, I wouldn't have
I
guessed
mean,
that.
and actually, here's the scary thing. It was the best-selling by a wide margin too.
Really?
Yeah. So, I know some people are going to ask like, well, what are your sources? It's like, well, I have friends and I can tell you what they relayed to me. Whether you choose to believe it or not, that's entirely up to you. But that was a pair from what they said, like, oh yeah, that I mean, what was interesting is like that one movie sold almost as many copies as a couple of the worst selling DBZ movies.
Really?
Yeah, but then that did instigate a discussion in the company because it was so different from the show. Like that was apparently where they were like serious, the closest they got to reconsidering continuing with it, and apparently it was Gen Fukunaga himself who basically took an afternoon to watch the movie, and he watched two episodes of the TV show and decided that the success didn't really matter because it was so different.
Yeah.
And hey, I'm gonna say, I mean, I'm sure a lot of you are listening to that and saying, "Well, that's true. That's frustrating." It's like, well, no, but I understand where he's coming from. From a business perspective, that's probably the right call to make. I mean, that would be kind of like, good what's a good example of a series where one was I mean, well, let's pretend for a second that there was like a Star Wars TV series, like let's say there was one 20 years ago. And let's say that 20 years ago, The Last Jedi had come out and had made more money than anything else, but the TV series was on the verge of being canceled. The Last Jedi is like the most different Star Wars thing ever made. That people have made that very clear. And it's really hard to look at a Last Jedi success and saying that that's good for the show when the show is completely different from that movie. Hypothetically speaking, of course.
Well, they could have continued the movies though, because the movies are their own individual property. I mean, that should have I would at least have hoped opened that door. But if they didn't want to continue the TV series, maybe they didn't find it worth it to continue the films on that
Yeah,
side.
yeah. Well, yeah. I don't completely understand all their thinking. I mean, shoot, I was even surprised that last time they renewed it, I think the only reason we got it a digital release is because they had to do something different to get it renewed. So they said, "Well, I'll tell you what, we'll pick up the digital distribution rights as well." And but that was all that they intended
Yeah.
to do. So, but again, like I said, I kind of felt like I was in an abusive relationship because they would say, "Hey, but if you buy these digital copies, we might do more," and they had no intention of
I
doing
think
more.
the digital copies actually sold very well. To my knowledge, they did.
They they did sell well. They just I think it kind of actually with Case Closed, it kind of felt like a Dragon Ball Z situation where if you really stop and think about it, Funimation has sold us Dragon Ball Z, the same show,
Yeah.
over and over again. And I think they were kind of doing that with Case Closed. Like, yeah, they knew there was more they could do, but it's so much easier to just put a new cover on the DVD or just have a digital release, and now it's new. Come buy it again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's and the Funimation just has that history. It's like, well, first there's just the DVDs, and it's like, oh, here's the orange boxes, and it's widescreen now. And then it's like, oh, now here's the Dragon boxes. It's the definitive edition. Now we're gonna have uh the orange boxes for the Blu-rays was. Now it's digitally remastered, but then they get canceled. Then it's like, oh hey, it's coming back to Blu-ray, but now it's widescreen remastered, and then
Yeah.
finally the Dragon Ball Ultimate box. Hey, the 4:3 aspect ratio is back, the way it was meant to be seen, and it's like, yeah, how much money did this cost me over the years?
Shoot, I just invested a whole bunch and just bought the Dragon boxes and just said, okay, I'm not buying anything else.
The Dragon boxes. Uh, yeah, I bought the Blu-ray box set that they only made 4,000 copies of or something like that, and I know picture-wise it's not the best. I know they're basically pulling another fast one. It's not really remastered, but as I explained to people, you know what? This is by far the simplest it's been. All 291 episodes, one box set, $350, sold.
Yeah, I'm happy with my Dragon boxes, and then I bought the Rock the Dragon with the original Ocean cast, which I love the original cast. So
Yeah, well, that's
you
kind
know,
of how I feel about like Sailor Moon. Objectively speaking, the new Viz Media dub is way better than the Deke dub. On the other hand, Terry Hawk's a Sailor Moon to me, and she always will be.
yeah, and so I think the future's bright, but I think the future's also going to be interesting for the series, and um, I'm just glad that we've maintained a good relationship and friendship to be able to continue to talk about it over the years, and I think your articles, seriously, were really impactful.
Yeah, although, although I do remember one time, I think you shared one of my articles, and there was like at least one person said, Kevin writes the worst articles ever. He doesn't cite sources or anything, and it's like, well, look, it's not like I work for Funimation themselves and like have access to documents. I have to rely on third-party information, and
Yeah.
I was very transparent about that. It's like, these are what sources say. Take it with a grain of salt if you must.
Well,
But
yeah, it's kind of like the movie. I knew the movies were coming, but I couldn't say who my source was because, well, that would have been bad, you know.
well, and what people don't understand, and by the way, I got into a non-Detective Conan based spat with someone on Twitter who said that I was crazy for thinking that Disneyland would require vaccination passports for entry at one point. It's like, oh, some mystical person who works at Disney? Well, who is it? And it's like, that's not how it works. Like, what makes people think that I'm going to give up a source who will
Right.
probably not talk to me anymore if I give that source to prove some random person on Facebook or Twitter wrong?
Yeah, and that's the thing. I can understand that, and sometimes for me, I'll just sit on information, and then when it's announced, now it's official, you know, and it's
Yeah,
like I can live with that.
I probably, but you know what? At the time, here's the thing. At the time, there was so few articles on Case Closed being written,
Yep.
and maybe it was a period of time. I was alone, I was single, and I was just binging the show, wishing there was more of it. So it's like I got this information from these people, and it's like, well, you know what? I'm going to write an article about it, and they would say, okay, but leave my name out of it. And at that point, it's so. Do you just wait until something's announced, or do you write an article because nothing's being written otherwise? So I kind of had like a fire in my belly, and it was kind of like I just wanted to encourage people like, this is the mindset in the company right now. This is what you need to do. And yeah, I had my own conversations with people who would say like, well, I'm not buying any DVDs unless I'm guaranteed to get the whole thing. And it's like, well, you're not going to get the whole thing unless you start buying the DVDs.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. I think now it's like I just want, transparency and from companies, that handle the series. And I think, ultimately, I was happy to talk about your articles because I thought, for sure, okay, here's somebody who's actually, you know, breaking it down in a way that I think a lot of people can understand, that haven't had good information before. And I think over the years, I think people just want information about what's going on. I think people that have already, purchased the series and bought it and shelled out money, to me, they have a pass. And they're kind of in that club, as far as, okay, they're entitled to that information at this point, and they need
Yeah.
to know.
And I want to add, nothing in the articles have outright ever been disproven.
Right.
So,
Of course.
in fact, several things have actually been corroborated later on after the license was lost, and Anime News Network would have like a voice actor on the podcast, and Jerry Jewell would be there confirming something that I had technically broken 7 years ago.
Right. Right.
And no, Jerry Jewell's not my source, folks. Don't bother him. I've only spoken to him twice.
Yeah, and I mean, and he's a really fun guy. I mean, he's a very nice guy. I got to meet him at Techo 2015, so just a
Yeah,
really cool guy. We were actually supposed to do a couple panels, but I think that the the con kind of messed up the scheduling. So,
yeah,
but very cool to talk to, really.
yeah. Well, conventions are definitely taking a hit. It's going to be a while before conventions come back, and there's not going to be as many, I think.
No,
Which
no.
I actually personally think isn't entirely a bad thing. I think there was just way too many conventions at one point where it's like, what? So you mean I got to go to the Gargoyles convention this week, and then the next week I got to go to the Star Trek convention? I mean, and then there's Kamea-Con.
Oh yeah.
Like, where does it stop? And yeah, even like in my case closed dealings, like when I got a sense of what like people how many people watched on Cartoon Network versus how many people actually bought DVDs, there was a pretty big gap, and it's like, yeah, I'm kind of understanding the not releasing season 6 a lot more once I start delving into this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then at the end of the day, you kind of have to at one point say, you know what? I know no one wants to hear this, but it's our fault we didn't get any more of this.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, we did not show up and pay the money to do this, and that's uh, that's kind of because and a kind of similar thing with Funimation. I mean, anime fans and animation fans in general did themselves a huge favor by making Demon Slayer the #1 movie last weekend and #2 the weekend before, because how many studios say they will not release an R-rated animated movie that's not a comedy in theaters because they don't make money and no one's going to pay to see them. And you know what? Over this month, fans basically proved like, no, we will see an R-rated animated movie that is not a comedy, and we will make it successful to boot. And so I can guarantee you, we will see Demon Slayer the movie 2 whenever they make it in theaters. Heck, we might even see more anime movies that are tied to TV series that are not conventionally popular in theaters because this was not considered conventionally popular, and yet it was a surprise hit. So money speaks.
Oh, of course. No, no question about it. And I know Discotech has even publicly said they want to put Conan films in theaters at some point.
Yeah.
Once this whole
Yeah.
COVID thing is, a little more under control.
Oh, I will I will go pay to see Conan films. In fact, here's one more fun little tidbit. I saw the Zero Enforcer movie. I saw it in 4DX. I didn't go to Anime Expo, but my best man He asked what did I want to do, and I said they're showing some 40X anime movies, but I don't want to pay. And he made an arrangement so that we could have our 4-person bachelor party seeing the Detective Conan movie.
Oh, lucky you. Oh my
Yeah,
God.
that was
That had to be so cool.
that was fun. That was a lot of fun. And if anyone from Discotheque or well, really anyone who's involved with Conan is listening to this, yes, I will pay to see more in 40X, IMAX, or whatever you want. Heck, even just a normal theater, I will pay to see it.
Dude, that's awesome. I had no idea that you got to go see that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it se it seemed maybe I don't know if anyone's gonna understand this, but it felt weird to do an article or a video about a personal thing like that. I mean, I didn't want to like make my bachelor party the subject of my next
Yeah.
professional job. There's just some things you kind of want to keep separate.
Yeah, I think that that's a healthy way of thinking about it for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So that was kind of my thoughts on that. But yeah, that was uh, and by the way, not even the greatest movie in the world, of course. But
No,
it
no.
was just not even my favorite of the series. But it was just fun to do it that way. But then it's like now I also got to see, thanks to Los Angeles, it's like, oh, got to see Weathering with You in 40X, and we got to see one of the My Hero Academia movies in 40X and in IMAX, and most recently Demon Slayer. So it's like and that's why I was so disappointed to find out that Netflix bought the rights to the next Sailor Moon movies.
Yeah.
I was so disappointed. I was like, no, no, I want to see them in theaters, and we know they'll do well. Like like they will do well, and of course, this is a problem I have with Netflix in general. It's not just, I mean, I want to see their movies in theaters. I don't want to stream them the first time. Irishman, not Roman, Roma, uh, and The Little Prince. Like these movies are great in theaters, but once they pick up a movie, it becomes like a guessing game. Like, well, are you going to have like a chance to see it in theaters, or is it going to go straight to the streaming service? And someone was funny because I made a video expressing my displeasure about that, and they said it's not like Jurassic Park. It wasn't made to be seen in theaters. It's like, shut up! It was made to be seen in theaters. Why were I don't know, the internet.
Yeah, and if they ever do put films out in theaters, they're not there very long. I know they did that with the Breaking Bad movie El Camino. That went in
which
for 2 days, and that was about it.
which I did see in
Yeah.
theaters, and that was when you could have a sold out showing. So, and of course, the funny thing is, it's like, yeah, it was clearly made to be seen in theaters. It was visually shot in a way to be enhanced by a dark room on a big screen. And I think you devalue these movies when you put them on streaming. I'm a little I guess this is getting on a side tangent, but I'm a little nervous that Paramount has basically announced like they want to have a new movie on Paramount Plus every week, and it's like, yeah, we tried this before with the movie of the week on ABC. Does anyone remember those? Probably not. But they
Yeah.
had a new movie every week, and yes, some of them were memorable, but most of them were disposable, and you never heard from them again. And
Yeah.
it's like I don't want Detective Conan and Sailor Moon and my childhood heroes to be disposable entertainment.
Yeah. Well, I got a feeling Conan won't be because I think TMS has a pretty tight leash on the property. It's just the question of what's next and what's down the road.
Yeah. Actually, here's an interesting question that I just thought about.
Yeah.
Like, so what if Netflix, because by the way, Netflix just picked up the Shaman King anime, which I don't mind as much because that's a show. It won't be simulcast, but whatever, I'll watch it when it comes out. What if Netflix made a deal with TMS and said, hey, tell you what, we'll pay this much money for this much of the show and this many movies for Netflix. So now we're guaranteed a good chunk of the show, and several movies are going to come to America, but we are not guaranteed to A, be able to buy them on disc, or B, be able to see them in theaters.
I would honestly be okay with that because I think fans up front would know what they were getting because it would be in that deal of, okay, this is what they're going to get. I would like a release of some sort digitally at least for the episodes and the movies they're working on, but if they made that kind of deal, I'd be fine with it because most likely in the press release it would tell you exactly what was coming
Yeah.
and fans could know.
Yeah, I'd personally be okay with it at this point because even though I would like to have more Detective Conan on DVD and Blu-ray. I would. But at this point in time, essentially, when they released the episode 1 movie, I pretty much saw that as a reboot. Like, okay, it's been how many years since we've last touched this property in America? We're going to reintroduce it. And it's like, if this is what it takes to kind of get it to be popular again, then sure, let's do it. But that's why it's like good job on Funimation for their Demon Slayer thing, because another thing that happened with that is like I can guarantee you right now, Funimation just got a pay raise from Netflix. It's like, oh yeah, you want season 2 of that show? Well, you know how much money this movie made? How about we raise the price a little bit?
Yep.
So I would like if for one day Detective Conan could be in that position where maybe Netflix kind of restarts the career. Maybe one of the movies goes to theaters and it does unexpectedly well, and then they can go back to Netflix and say, oh yeah, so you saw how much money our movie made, right? Maybe we sweeten the pot a little bit before giving you more.
Yeah, and I think that how the movies do worldwide played a huge impact to how them coming here too, because it's like, man, this movie made so much money overseas. I mean, we gotta try it in English, you know?
Well, what was also unique about last year, and maybe this helped raise awareness of the Blu-rays, is that when Japanese theaters reopened, one of the movies that was there was a re-release of a Detective Conan movie, and it was number one weekend. So Deadline highlights that, and they put a picture of Detective Conan on above the headline, and hey, that's free publicity right there.
Yeah. Yeah, free publicity for a show that doesn't necessarily get that much publicity at this point over here at least. So all that stuff's really important, for it
Mm-hmm.
going forward. So I'm hopeful. I know you're hopeful about it. I hope this sometime this year there's some unveiling of, okay, this is what we're gonna do. This is we've listened to the fans have spoken. This is where we're gonna go for the direction of the series, and I'd be okay with it either
Yeah,
way.
I, well, beggars can't be choosers, and I mean, if you read between the lines of all those articles I wrote, I was begging Funimation, please release more.
Yeah,
I really want this.
yeah.
So yeah, I would be okay with that too. So anyway, this was a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun.
We should do this again sometime.
Oh, we will. There's going to be some stuff to talk about, but why don't you tell people how they can link up with you and follow what you're doing?
Okay, so I I have there's a few ways you can get a hold of me. I do have a couple personal blogs. One's called Save Blu-ray 3D. Might not be very relevant to people here. The other one is yourcomicbookguy.com. Make sure to include the www part where I do write about comics, and yes, this includes the Case Closed manga. And if you want to find me on YouTube, I have a few YouTube channels, so I'm going to name the two that I think are the most relevant. One of them is called The Failed Journalist, which, yeah, the name probably will be changed soon. There's a little bit of an inside joke on that one, and maybe I'll explain it some other time. But that's where I talk about anime, animation, Disney. There's going to be a very interesting discussion on theme parks and COVID-19 passports that people might find interesting. I don't know. And the other one is called The Entrepreneur Media, where and maybe he'll put links to that because I know that name's kind of a mouthful, but that's where I talk about physical media, streaming, video games, things like that. So I think those are the most relevant, because I just do way too much to list it all off here, but those would probably be the most relevant to your viewers.
Okay, perfect. And obviously everybody here knows how to find us, so we're everywhere. Now we're on Spotify and Anchor and Apple and Google, and oh my gosh, now we're kind of finally with the times a little bit. So not just on YouTube anymore. But seriously, I've loved every minute of this, and really getting to break down the history of the show with somebody who's intimately familiar with it. So thank you for coming on today.
You're welcome.
And as usual, guys, next time we will have just as much to talk about. Well, maybe not 2 hours worth, but
I could have gone to 3, but
I know
I've got another live stream tonight, so.
Oh, do you?
Yep.
But till next time, guys, take care, and we'll see you next time. Take care. I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode of the Case Closed podcast. If you like what you heard here, head on over to our Facebook and Twitter page to give us a like and a follow. And for more extra special content that you can't get anywhere else, subscribe to our Patreon page. Take care, guys, and we'll see you later.